I wanted to ask you guys another question, like in terms of, you know, you put out so-called writing advice, whatever, writing adjacent, whatever you want to call
Sure.
it. But how do you feel that
Writing
that feeds
suggestions?
into, yeah, writing suggestions? Yeah, fuck writing excuses, writing suggestions. Um,
Yeah.
how do you feel that the podcast feeds into like the sci-fi, fantasy, and self-pub communities? Because you guys are so much more like well known within the self-pub crowd.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think before this I wasn't, and this is now the reason why. Like, just to give you a really easy example of this, when I was trying to get people to review Across the Broken Stars, which is the like second novel that I published, it was such an uphill battle. I probably reached out to, I don't know, like 50 different reviewers and blogs, and maybe like 5 of them said yes with like a free copy to review it. And when I was trying to promote Siege of Treboulain, which is the most recent release I've done, I reached out to like probably 10 or 15 people, yourself amongst them, and pretty much everyone said yes. And I think it was
Mhm.
because of this podcast. Like, they'd heard my name from it before. I even had, I think it was like on Bookborn's channel, she did a review of Siege of Treboulain that was great.
Yep.
And she was like, oh yeah, Jed Herne's pretty well known in the self-published fantasy community. And I was like, what? That's news to me. Never heard this one before. But yeah, apparently like that's what the podcast has done. So I don't know if it's, you guys are like more established. So you probably didn't experience like
I just got
that same
really
thing.
really lucky at the SPFBO. Right, my book just came out. Literally,
Well, you wrote a great
the
book. So
day
there's
the
that
day
aspect.
that I entered, and I was like 298 or 299 out of 300 cut off
Wow.
for the
Wow.
entries.
Wow, dude.
That's huge.
And then I was a finalist and got third. So that's the only reason I know anyone.
Mm-hmm.
That is pretty huge.
I mean,
what year was
I
that?
don't know if the
26
podcast is sort of like,
2016.
I would assume it has increased. I wouldn't say popularity, but recognizability, I guess, for me. But what I do know is we fairly regularly have people recognize us online on Facebook groups, on Twitter, or on Reddit, or whatever, and say, "Oh, you're one of the WWW boys, you know, Wizard of Wars and Birds boys," and it's like, "Oh, your podcast
Triple
has really
dub.
helped me." Yeah,
Triple dub.
but it's
Yeah.
it's nice because like the number of times people say like your podcast has actually really helped me sort of like get through
Yeah.
this, or knuckle down and get my
Yeah,
book written
that's
or anything
cool.
like that. And that's awesome because it's like, well, that's kind of the reason that we exist, I suppose. That like the reason the podcast does exist is to do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
And
that's just like,
I know for a fact that when I did my last Kickstarter, there were a ton of people that were telling me, "Oh, I heard about this, found out about this from the podcast."
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
You know.
Well,
Yeah,
I mean, I
now that I'm
recently
editing
put
the
a post
podcast-
on Reddit Progression Fantasy about my latest release, Titan Hoppers, which released a few days ago. You should read it. And one of the guys who responded
awesome.
said, "I thought." One of the guys who responded said, "I thought I recognised your name. You're one of the Wizards, Warriors, and Words lot." And it's like, yeah. I am. So I suppose it definitely has helped to catapult our names into the stars.
Into the fan,
maybe
into
low
the fame,
stratisphere.
the fame
I
of
don't know about the
self-love.
stars yet. That's it.
But now that
Yeah,
I'm
no, I
editing the
agree with
podcast,
that.
it's like I see the YouTube comments and stuff like that because I just take a cheeky look
Yeah.
sometimes. Yeah.
No, go for it.
And I see the comments that people are leaving, and it's just like, oh yeah, like I was going through this particular problem, or it's really good to hear that you guys are, suffering from the same sort of like writing woes as me and that kind of thing. But
Yes.
your discussion of it helped me, because like you say, it's never like, it's always suggestive as opposed to prescriptive. It's like, this is what we're doing, and that's what works for us, and maybe someone else takes that and they take this little tidbit from one bit and then a tidbit from someone else, or and just kind of like accumulate it into this like amoeba of whatever the fuck their writing personality is and how that works for them. And that for me is like the coolest thing about what you guys are doing.
Thank
I
you.
do wonder, because I mean, I don't listen to a lot of other.
Yeah, it's awesome when we hear stuff like that.
Yeah,
I don't listen to a lot of other writing podcasts myself, but I imagine most of the sort of writing podcasts, they advice podcasts, they do actually give advice. Whereas a lot of the time, episodes that we've done have been like, talking about burnout and the like, and just how we've gone through it and how it's affected us, or whatever, any other subject like that, which is obviously a lot different to just like, hey, this is how you write a prologue or whatever. So I imagine in some ways it's helpful in very different ways to a more standard writing advice podcast.
Yeah.
And that's what I think I wanted to create with this, is like, not so much, because that, to your point, Rob, like I didn't see a lot of other podcasts out there that were like giving you that really raw, unfiltered glimpse into what it was like to be a writer, like both all of the great things that come with it, and then also all of the difficulties and the struggles that come with it. And I think like that's something that we've sort of gone towards really great. And for me personally, my favorite episodes we've done have been Fletcher's chaos episodes, where we talk about things like happiness and, trying to like find fulfillment in writing and stuff. And like, that's the kind of thing I love discussing. The search for Steve.
Do another one of those.
We need to do another one of those for sure.
We haven't
and I think
done
like
one for a
I
while.
love those so much, because it's like, this is
Jed
just
has to pay me more to
the
edit
stuff
those
I would want to
episodes.
hear. Yeah,
Chaos episodes.
they're just so chaotic that it explodes Adrian's editing computer. But yeah, that's why I really appreciate you doing those episodes for us, Mike, because like that's the kind of stuff that I think is truly valuable. For the same reason that like you can't see behind me, but I've got a ton of biographies from like Stephen King, Bruce Springsteen, even like Matthew McConaughey, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and like they're all different creatives in a sense. But I think the biggest benefit that you get from reading those biographies, apart from them just being fascinating storytellers, is like you really get to see all of the parts of the creative life, like all the good parts, all the bad parts. And just like getting that insight into it allows you to like be so much better when it comes to shaping your own journey as a writer, because you're kind of like, oh, it's not enough to just aim for, tons of sales. I've got to actually think about if I'm enjoying what I'm producing and, all those sorts of things.
Because it's